Breathing. Four steps. Inhalation, that is intake of the air. Inhalation. This leads to inspiration. It leads to inspiration. Diffusion of O2, oxygen, into the blood. Into the blood. Right. Into the blood. And diffusion of carbon dioxide into alveoli. Diffusion of carbon dioxide into the alveoli. This leads to expiration. The air becomes stale, doesn't remain fresh. Expiration produces exhalation. The release of air from the lungs. Exhalation. Right. Respiratory tract. Respiratory tract or the system. The system comprises the respiratory passages, and the lungs. Respiratory passages and lungs. The complete respiratory passage can be divided into two parts. The conducting passage, and the respiratory area, where actual gaseous exchange occurs. The respiratory area. The space in this area is called dead space. Dead space. Lungs appear present in thoracic cavity. Covered by membranes. Covered by two membranes. The next page.
सर
हाँ जी
सर ऊपर जब
pleural membranes. Pleural membranes two in number. These enclose a fluid filled cavity called the pleural cavity. Called the pleural cavity. The amount of fluid is very less. It is 2 ml only. 2 ml. The cavity is a low pressure cavity. It's a low pressure cavity. The pressure remains negative. Pressure remains negative, or you can say always less than atmospheric pressure. Always less than the atmospheric pressure. The average value of the pressure is minus 4 mm. And the range is usually minus 3 to minus 6. This decrease in the pressure is during inspiration. The fall in pressure is seen during inspiration, and this minus 3 value is during expiration. But mostly it remains minus 4. ये जो चेंजेस आते हैं, ये चेंजेस फोर्स्ड इनहेलेशन एक्सहेलेशन के टाइम आते हैं. ये बहुत ज़्यादा मेजर चेंजेस नहीं होते. Now, the left lung has a depression. This depression is known as cardiac notch. इस depression को हम क्या बोलते हैं? Called cardiac notch, which helps, which accommodates the heart. Gives place to the heart. The space between the two lungs, where the heart is present, is called mediastinum. Mediastinum, STINUM. This is behind the sternum, behind the chest bone of the sternum. Then we'll talk about the respiratory tract. Next, please. The nose, the nasal cavity, the upper lip, and the lower. Right. Now, there's a passage over here, and this passage converges into an opening. there is a tissue which hangs in the pharynx, गले में नीचे की तरफ दिखता है, इसके पीछे ये ओपनिंग है. This piece of tissue is known as uvula, UVULA, and this opening is the internal nair. It is the internal nair. This opening in the nose is known as nostril. This is known as nostril. And the opening in the skull, which communicates, which allows the passage of the air entering from the nostril into this posterior chamber, is known as the external nair. It is towards the outside. External nair. These are two openings present in the skull. खोपड़ी में, skull में, right? तो air यहाँ से travel करती है पीछे की तरफ. This is the nasal chamber. Nasal chamber, which is lined by Schneiderian membrane. Schneiderian membrane, which is olfactory. This membrane helps us to smell. Olfactory in nature. Now the air, it enters into the pharynx. The air enters into the pharynx. This is the pharynx. And more specifically, it enters the nasopharynx. The part of the pharynx in which the air enters, the internal air is present, is the nasopharynx. इस हिस्से को हम nasopharynx बोल देते हैं जहाँ पर ये air enter करती है. Now from the nasopharynx, it enters into the windpipe. An opening known as glottis. This opening is known as glottis, which is covered by the epiglottis. The epiglottis. It acts as a lid. It covers the glottis. Covers the glottis during swallowing of food. During swallowing of food. यहाँ से बंद हो जाता है. Now this glottis, this opening, it has got certain flap-like structures in it. इसके अंदर as such closed रहता है. There is a very thin slit between this. It remains closed otherwise. This slit has this slit is between the membranes. Now these membranes vary in thickness. These membranes vary in thickness. They are thin in this region towards the slit, and they're thicker behind it. यहाँ पे thicker है. This thicker part, this thicker region is called. This thicker part is called the false vocal cords. True, false, vocal cords. And the thinner regions, these inner thinner regions, are the true vocal cords. The true vocal cords. So basically, if this is the opening, there is a dilated part here, and then this becomes tubular. The vocal cords अगर just below the glottis इस जगह पे glottis में से देखोगे तो सामने सामने दिखता है बिल्कुल थोड़ा सा हल्का सा नीचे है. Here are the vocal cords. The region where these vocal cords are, this dilated region, is known as the larynx or the voice cords. This is where the larynx are, or the voice cords. Right. Then this tube, the windpipe, which enters into the chest cavity and would now divide it. From the throat region, it enters into the chest cavity and it divides. This windpipe is the trachea. This larynx, this part, has cartilages. Has cartilages. Which support its wall. Which support its walls. Cartilages. The cartilages. Three hyaline, three elastic. Three hyaline plus three elastic. Thyroid, arytenoid, cricoid. Are hyaline in nature. Next page. Epiglottis, cuneiform, 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 and corniculate. Corniculate. These are elastic cartilages. Elastic cartilages. जस्ट इन द फ्रंट, सबसे आगे की तरफ एक बड़ा सारा कार्टिलेज नजर आता है, which is which actually protects the thyroid gland. Goes back पीछे की तरफ, ऐसे टिल्ट करके बना रहे हैं जैसे पीछे की तरफ भी दिख जाए. This is the thyroid cartilage. सबसे आगे की तरफ, इसमें नीचे की, इसके नीचे यहाँ आपको एक कार्टिलेज का बैंड नजर आता है. These cartilages are held together by ligaments. मसल है इस जगह पे, यहाँ पे मसल है पूरी, इधर एक बैंड ऑफ मसल्स है, इधर दूसरा बैंड ऑफ मसल्स है. This cartilage is the cricoid cartilage, CRICOID. ये जो पॉइंट बनता है, this point forms the Adam's apple. This forms the Adam's apple. यहाँ पे हमको दो कार्टिलेजेस नजर आते हैं, सामने सामने थायराइड और क्रिकोइड कार्टिलेज. अब पोस्टीरियर व्यू पीछे की तरफ से, ये तो फ्रंटल व्यू हो गया. पोस्टीरियर व्यू, फ्रंटल व्यू सामने से, थायराइड कार्टिलेज एंड क्रिकोइड कार्टिलेज. अब पीछे की तरफ, पीछे की तरफ अगर अंदर की तरफ से देखो तो आपको ये इस तरह से ये फ्लैप लाइक स्ट्रक्चर नजर आता है ऊपर को, या पीछे की तरफ जुड़ा हुआ है. ये ओपनिंग है, ये इस तरह से ओपनिंग हो जाएगी. ये ग्लॉटिस की ओपनिंग, जिसके ऊपर ये सेटल डाउन होता है. दिस इज एपिग्लॉटिस. थर्ड कार्टिलेज, ये एपिग्लॉटिस. ये एपिग्लॉटिस. आपको व्यू चेंज करना, ये हो गया लैरिंग्स. अब आपको व्यू चेंज करना पड़ेगा. अब साइड से जब देखते हैं तो ये आगे की तरफ थायराइड कार्टिलेज हो गया जो एडम्स एप्पल बना रहा है, राइट. अब यहाँ से पीछे की तरफ आप जाते हो, इस जगह से पीछे की तरफ, इस जगह पे पीछे की तरफ आपको एक और कार्टिलेज नजर आता है, पिरामिडल शेप कार्टिलेज. ये पीछे की तरफ है, ये इस तरह का कार्टिलेज. दिस इज थायराइड कार्टिलेज, एडम्स एप्पल. एडम्स एप्पल, एडम्स एप्पल इधर हो गया, ठीक है. ये नीचे की तरफ लैरिंग्स जा रहा है, यहाँ पीछे की तरफ ये मसल्स और ये सब, ठीक है। यहाँ एक कार्टिलेज है, ये थिकनेस होगी वॉल, दिस इज एरिटेनॉइड। एरिटेनॉइड कार्टिलेज which is pyramidal in shape, pyramidal, pyramidal shape. Thyroid cartilage is edge shaped, edge shaped, ठीक। अब इस एरिटेनॉइड के साथ ही इस जगह पे आपको एक और कार्टिलेज नजर आता है, ये ऊपर को जा रहा है, ये जो कार्टिलेज है वॉल में, दिस इज क्यूनिफॉर्म, CUNEIFORM, क्यूनिफॉर्म। The fourth cartilage, the fifth cartilage. Uniform cartilage. ठीक है, आप इसको ऐसे समझ सकते हो कि जो ये रिम है, ये जो किनारा है एपिग्लोटिस का, यहाँ से यहाँ ये कार्टिलेज जा रहा है दोनों तरफ, जो आपको साइड में दिख रहा है, ठीक है। ये जो कार्टिलेज इसके साइड में जा रहा है, दिस इज द क्यूनिफॉर्म, ये इस तरह एपिग्लोटिस इधर को, इसके बेस पे, इसके बेस पे यहाँ पे, यहाँ आपको ये दो कार्टिलेजेस नजर आते हैं, ये है कॉर्निकुलेट, these are the corniculate, the sixth cartilage, corniculate। ठीक है, तो बिल्कुल आगे हमें दो कार्टिलेजेस नजर आते हैं, ये वैसे मसल से कवर्ड है, बाकी ये पूरा का पूरा इस तरह का हो गया। तो थायराइड एक और क्रिकॉइड दूसरा, ये हमें आगे से नजर आते हैं, ठीक है। पीछे की तरफ पोस्टीरियर व्यू में अगर हम देखें, एपिग्लोटिस इसके किनारे पर, इसको सपोर्ट करने के लिए यूनिफॉर्म, और इसके बेस पर कॉर्निकुलेट, तो सिक्स कार्टिलेज, राइट। और यहीं पे अगर हम एरिटेनॉइड बनाने की कोशिश करें, एरिटेनॉइड इस जगह है, एरिटेनॉइड इस जगह पे, इसका ज्यादा क्लियर व्यू साइड से आता है, they are more clear from the sides, these would be the erythrocytes। These are the six cartilages of the larynx। अब आगे ब्रांचेस की बात करते हैं, नेक्स्ट पेज। The trachea, the trachea divides to form the tubular passage is known as bronchi, Each one is known as bronchus. Look at this bronchi. Now these bronchi, they branched, but these branches are not visible because they disappear into the lungs. ये lungs में गायब है. इस तरह से. Now the divisions of vestibular passage periodically occurs and forms the bronchioles. The first time division, the primary bronchioles. The primary bronchiole. The second time division, the secondary bronchiole. The third time division, the tertiary bronchioles. Now these tertiary bronchioles, they divide profusely. Now, when these passages, the terminal passages here, when these divide, this division continues further. And as such, what happens at a particular instance, in certain branches, alveolar ducts begin to develop. These are tiny ducts, छोटी-छोटी ducts होती है. These ducts begin to arise. And at the end of these ducts, sac-like structures develop. And these sac-like structures are known as the alveoli. The bronchioles having the alveoli are known as the respiratory bronchioles. Respiratory bronchioles. Just before the respiratory bronchioles, where there are no alveoli, the last alveoli, the last bronchioles, when there are no alveoli, these last bronchioles are known as the terminal bronchioles. The terminal bronchioles. आप ये चीज कह सकते हो, the tertiary bronchioles, they form terminal bronchioles. The terminal bronchioles form respiratory bronchioles. The respiratory bronchioles, they have alveolar ducts. These tiny ducts are the alveolar ducts. And the alveolar ducts end up into the alveoli. These form the alveoli. Now this respiratory tree, it's a tree-like structure. This respiratory tree is supported by cartilaginous rings. The respiratory tree from trachea to the terminal bronchioles. The terminal bronchioles is supported by cartilaginous rings. Cartilaginous C-shaped rings. These prevent the collapse of the ducts. Prevents collapse of the ducts. This is about the branches. The terminal bronchioles तक की जो space है, up to the terminal bronchioles, द स्पेस टू ब्रीथ द डेड स्पेस, क्योंकि यहाँ पे एल्वेलाई नहीं है, और अगर एल्वेलाई नहीं है यहाँ पे गैसियस एक्सचेंज नहीं है, डेड स्पेस।